Hi everyone, I'm Stephen and welcome to Audio Nautica. Today we're doing a high-end vintage audio shootout between this Sansui AU-X11 and my recently acquired Accuphase P-102 power amplifier. So we are comparing an integrated to a power amp. The Accuphase has been driven by my C202 preamp. I have made separate videos on each of these, but I wanted to do a comparison between this AU-X11 and this Accuphase, because these are both considered to be excellent amplifiers. The Sansui AU-X11 is considered by many people to be the pinnacle of Sansui integrated amplifiers. And Accuphase is a company that was created for the specific purpose of making high-end hi-fi equipment only. So Sansui was, I guess, much more broad in its range. It had some high-end gear like this AU-X11, but it also had some stuff that was very domestic in its nature, and that kind of stuff is rather unnicely called Sansuage, but I would certainly say the AU-X11 is not in that category. So now that I actually have both of these in my system, and I've been listening to them both for a while, I wanted to address the question as to which one is the best one. When we look at them on paper, it's not quite so cut and dry. So we see there's 5 years apart between them, the AU-X11 1982, the Accuphase 1987, similar in price, although remember the Accuphase system would have ended up being a lot more expensive because you'd buy the preamp as well. Sansui is Class AB, whereas the Accuphase is Class A only. A huge difference in power. Sansui 160 watts per channel into 8 ohms, whereas the Accuphase is only 50 watts. The Sansui is single-ended only, whereas the Accuphase is balanced and single-ended. Now what this actually means in terms of an architecture point of view is that the Accuphase has actually got 4 power modules inside of it. So each channel, left and right, has got 2 power amplifier modules, because there's a plus and there's a minus module. So there's a total of 4 power amplifier modules in there, whereas the Sansui has only 2. THD, well, I think the THD really shows, how meaningless this figure has become in modern electronics. It might have meant something in the 1950s and 1960s, but I don't think it really means very much these days. It's just a number on a piece of paper. And the frequency response, the Sansui claims to go up to 300 kilohertz, the Accuphase up to 200 kilohertz. These are both high bandwidth amplifiers. The Sansui is famous for being very high bandwidth. Indeed, its predecessor, the AU-X1, it's a very similar design. So the X11 is an emergence from the X1 design. The AU-X1 had a tendency to erupt in smoke because it could get unstable because it was so high bandwidth. It could be set off by nearby interfering sources and so on that would cause it to disappear in a plume of smoke. So the X11, fortunately, is a whole lot more stable. So they're both very high bandwidth amplifiers, and that's important for dynamics, for capturing drums being hit, guitar strings being plucked, and so on. But again, I think that really the main difference, or the most important thing, is the difference in how they sound. And I'll talk about that in a second. But just another example as to why stats and figures get to a point where they're kind of meaningless. I did some square wave tests on both of these amplifiers. Unfortunately, I couldn't really capture it well enough to film just because of the way that my analog scope works. I probably needed a storage scope to be able to catch it on the rising edge properly. But I did do square wave tests on both of them. They're both quite impressive. However, the X11, the AU-X11, seems to perform better to me on square wave than the Accuphase did. So there was a little bit of ringing, not very much, but I could see more ringing on the Accuphase than I could see on the Sansui. So I thought that was quite interesting. But now, let's get back to how they sound. And this is where things get really interesting, because these are both high-end amplifiers. They are both very well regarded, which is why I'm surprised that the difference in sound is as different as it is. They both sound fantastic, but the Accuphase has a presence that the AU-X11 does not. There is a clearness, there is an immediacy in the music. The Accuphase seems to resolve everything that is in the recording. It's really quite incredible, and I've actually even experimented a little bit too. My Accuphase preamp does not have a turntable input, so what I can do is I can feed the turntable into the Sansui, use the Sansui as a preamp, and then I can drive the Accuphase just as a power amp from the Sansui line level output. And I notice it there as well. If I switch the Sansui then back to being an integrated, I find that it is much more reserved. So I notice it especially in things like guitar plucks. So if you have like an acoustic guitar, you hear the string being plucked. On the Accuphase, it's just incredible. It sounds like you are right there listening to the recording being made, where you can imagine the microphone right in front of the guitar, and that is what you're hearing. So that's where I notice the biggest difference is on those kind of acoustic instruments where you have guitar plucks. The other thing I notice it is in the decay on drums. Not so much the hit on the drum, but actually the ambience, the decay, the aftermath after the hit has taken place. All of that detail is just immediately present to me on the Accuphase in a way that it isn't on the Sansui. So if I switch between the two of them, and I've got them set up here on the same DAC, they're on the same speakers, I've got a little speaker switch box that allows me to switch the speakers between amplifiers. So everything's the same except for amplifiers to enable me to do this A-B comparison. If I switch between the two of them, if I listen to the Accuphase, then I switch to the Sansui, it sounds like someone has put a sheet of paper between me and the speakers. That's the kind of difference that I would describe. And again, I might be sounding like the Sansui sounds terrible. I'm not saying that at all. The Sansui is an amazing amplifier, and I say that on my video about it, and I stand by those comments. It is wonderful. But Accuphase, the difference, it's just really is next level. It is just unbelievable, and I'm pleased at being able to hear the difference in my ears. So what that means is every detail that is in the recording comes through to me in a new way in the Accuphase that it doesn't on the Sansui. Now that's good and bad. If you have a fantastic recording, so I gave the example of guitar strings, it sounds amazing. But if you have a bad recording, if you had a recording that is harsh, the Accuphase will reproduce that harshness. So what I have found is there are some recordings I can't listen to them on the Accuphase because it sounds like, or it feels like someone's gotten a toothpick and is driving the toothpick into my eardrums. So listening fatigue is actually a bit of a challenge with the Accuphase, depending on recording. It's not a problem for good recordings, but recordings that are not so good, I can get listening fatigue. So if I just want to sort of like have a casual listening session where all the roughness of a recording is smoothed out, then the Sansui is the pick. If I want the music to be as resolved as possible, as clear as possible, as immediate as possible to me, then the Accuphase is the pick. So this is why I say that the results are kind of surprising, because you'd expect there to be a clear winner. And yes, I suppose if you had to pick a winner, you'd say it's the Accuphase, for sure. But this Sansui is still here, and it's going to stay here, because as I say, sometimes the Accuphase just doesn't work for me, because it's so faithful to the recording. And sometimes I just want to have an easy listening session, background music, I'm doing something else here in the listening room / workshop. And I don't want to feel like someone's driving a toothpick into my eardrums. That's when I use the Sansui. Also just want to comment on the difference in power. The Sansui 160 watts per channel, the Accuphase only 50 watts per channel. It's very easy to think that 50 watts per channel is not enough. Look, I would simply say that power figures, I think in many ways, have been a big fat fudge for a very long time. And they mean a lot less than what they might indicate. Ultimately, what matters is headroom. And if you read the brochure for this Accuphase, what it says is that it has got a heap of headroom. And I have certainly noticed that as well. It will record plenty of bass. I've got my JBL 4333A studio monitors with their 15-inch woofers. I get plenty of bass out of this thing. And the needles, you know, they're not going into the red. This thing would quite happily operate right up there, up to its rating all day, every day. But that would be too loud for me in the environment that I'm currently in with these speakers. So 50 watts per channel is not proving a problem for me at all with 50 watts of Class A. So I think that pretty much sums it up. Yep, if I had to pick a favourite, absolutely it's the Accuphase, but I am also very quite fond of this Sansui AU-X11. Thanks so much for coming along with me on this shootout between Sansui and Accuphase. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, you might like to give me a like. Do you have any of these amplifiers? Do you have an Accuphase amplifier? What's your experience been? Which one would you pick? I love to read your comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.